How's it going, guys? I am Folkerman, your local brick built historian, with another episode of Brick Built History. Today we're taking a look at the Albatross D3 World War I fighter aircraft by Brickmania. This one is designed by Daniel Siskin. It says Albatross D3 World War I fighter aircraft. Contains 351 Lego and brick arm elements and one custom minifig. On the manufacturing plate, you have the same information, BKM 447, skill level 3 out of 5, and I have number 242. Whew, far away from number 1. And you have a monochromatic image of a forward-facing view with a simulated propeller spinning. Very cool. And let's take a look at the kit itself. So the Albatross is a very interesting plane, and it's kind of difficult to get the general shape, but I see that it kind of works. It's this weird like tan color because it's wood. It's literally made out of wood on the outside here. It's not uncommon for aircraft to be made out of wood in this era, but for the skin to be made out of wood is actually quite interesting, which I'll get into with the history. The front here has this dish on the surrounding the propeller because there was a propeller cone that was on the outside. It does kind of leave the props to wiggle a little bit, so it's kind of weird sometimes. Like the props will like kind of get it out of sorts, but it's okay. You have the engine here with the cylinders on the top and like the simulated exhaust or the valves, and you have the two Spandau machine guns in the center here. You have the V strut on the outside with the interior strut here, the painted wings with the Maltese cross on the top and the bottom, the sticker for the radiator, and I'll get into that later too. You have Lothar von Richthofen in the center here. Kind of sad thing. Doesn't really like to stay in there. There's nothing really keeping him in. So he just kind of sits there and wiggles. And you have the Leergewicht, 675 kilograms, and Zulässige Belastung. And it's kind of really difficult to read it, but if you're better at pronouncing German than I am, then go ahead and read it. Maltese cross on the fuselage, and Maltese cross, which I made crooked on the forward or vertical stabilizer and the rudder, and of course the painted horizontal stabilizer and elevator. And you have this like slanted wing piece back here, which is the tail drag. Then you also have the fixed landing gear on the bottom. Overall, a nice kit, a little fragile, especially this top wing. These brown like pieces, sometimes these like brown clips, sometimes don't like to stay in all too well, but they do their job if you just kind of force them to. But other than that, it's pretty good clip. Pretty good kit. Very small because it's World War One. Not the smallest, but properly sized. So with that said, let's go into the history of the aircraft and maybe a little bit into Lothar, the man piloting it. So the Albatross D3 would be made by the Albatross Flugzeugwerke, or Albatross Aviation Company. It was designed by Robert Thelen, who kind of did a mixture of aircraft design, which is very interesting. So the Albatross D1 and D2 actually incorporated this plywood skin, which was very unique for this time period. Most other aircraft used, well, actually every other aircraft, except until the Pfalz D3 came about, used wood frame covered in canvas. Although the wing would still use this wood frame and canvas structure, the fuselage would be completely covered in plywood. And it was really quite interesting because this would make the aircraft extremely durable and also a pain in the butt to fix, because unlike the canvas planes, you can't just stitch a patch on and boom, you're good to go. It also would add quite a bit of weight, but also made it more aerodynamic, and it would kind of revolutionize the thought of aerodynamics whenever it comes to aircraft, especially going on into World War II, where aerodynamics became more important than weight. So it used the same plywood skin fuselage as the D1 and the D2, but what was different between the D3 here and the D1 and D2 is the wing structure. In fact, the head of the German Air Corps decided that it was best to copy the wing of another aircraft. That aircraft was the Nieuport 17. The reason for this is that the Nieuport 17 was kind of just wreaking havoc against the Germans, since really their best aircraft at the time was the Albatross D2, which was extremely slow and not as maneuverable. To the Germans, the Nieuport was seen as a really good aircraft. It was very light, very maneuverable, and used this esquiplane wing style. So the Germans decided that they wanted to copy the Nieuport 17. Unfortunately, they realized that they didn't have a good enough engine. The Lebron engine of the Nieuport 17 is by far superior compared to the Urberacell engines of the Germans. So they decided to compromise and put a Nieuport 17-esque wing structure on the body of the Albatross D2, essentially, is what happened. And if you look at the wings of the Nieuport and the Albatross, you can kind of see the similarities. The top wing is wider than the bottom wing. The top wing flares out just like the Nieuport. And more importantly, you have this V strut. Now, the reason for this V strut and what the esquiplane really kind of exhibits is the fact that it only has one main wing spar on the bottom wing. If you don't know what a wing spar is, basically it's a wood, at this time, a wooden beam going across the wing. On the top wing, it's got two, basically going from here and here all the way across. This is what provides the main structure for the aircraft. Now, the bottom wing has only one. Well, whenever you have two wing spars going down to one wing spar, you have to make this V-type strut. Now, I already mentioned this in the Nieuport video, but the V-type strut is not strong whatsoever. In fact, the Albatross, although it would inherit the really lightweight wings of the Nieuport and would actually help with its maneuverability, it also inherits the downside of the Nieuport, which is the weak lower wing. So just like the Nieuport, in a high-speed dive or in a tight G turn, the lower wing of the Albatross would flex and eventually break. And really the only suggestion they had to fix it was to tell their pilots, don't go in high-speed dives and don't turn too fast. But you know how a pilot is, and if you try to tell him not to do something, he will eventually do it. The Albatross D3 would eventually be evolved into the D5A, and the the D5, and then the D5A, which is basically an Albatross D3, but with some minor improvements, including strengthening the lower wing so that it doesn't just break. The first flight of the D3 happened in late of 1916 and would be introduced in March of 1917. This was just in time for it to be the main proponent of what would be known as Bloody April. Bloody April is April of 1917 and was basically the Germans just completely decimating the Allies. Actually, at this point in time, the standard life expectancy of an Allied pilot was less than 2 weeks. So if they got a new replacement, he was more than likely dead in 2 weeks, which, once you think about it, is not a lot of time whatsoever. Now, the D3 had a lot of aces that would fly in the Albatross, including Manfred von Richthofen, Lothar von Richthofen, Kurt Wolff, Ernst Udet, Hermann Göring. There's a lot of them. Rudolf Berthold, Werner Voss. Basically, every German ace kind of flew the Albatross. Although Berthold and Voss would eventually go to the Pfalz D3, which eventually I'll make one of those, don't worry. But the Albatross was just a really good aircraft. And one thing that you might actually notice is the fact that the Albatross company itself was just known for its quality, and in fact, Albatross would be contracted to make Fokker planes. And some of the Fokker D7s or even DR1s would say Albatross on it. If you watch the Blue Max, you can see Albatross on the Fokker D7s there. And they were known to be higher quality than the actual Fokker aircraft, which is extremely good for Albatross, at least. One of the things about the Albatross D3, other than the weak lower wing, that was kind of a setback and they had to change, was the location of the radiator. Now, in order to keep the more smooth fuselage of the aircraft, they couldn't really just put a bulky radiator inside the skin of the aircraft. So what they did is they moved it to the top wing. Now, what I made here, I put it in the modified location, which is off to the side, but it was originally straight down the center. And unfortunately, if you say hit a radiator with a bullet and the bullet goes straight through the radiator and there's a big hole in the radiator, the liquid will start to leak from the radiator. And that liquid is not exactly cold. In fact, it is boiling hot. And some of the pilots would actually get burned by this radiator leaking coolant. I mean, other than the fact that your engine will start to overheat eventually, getting burned by radiator fluid is not exactly ideal. But it used a Austro-Daimler 200 horsepower 6-cylinder inline engine on the front here for its main source of power, and it would reach a pretty moderate 117 miles per hour, which is pretty good for an aircraft in World War I. The interesting plywood skin fuselage, the plywood skin fuselage, along with its aerodynamics and the lightened wing with the Newport 17's Esquaplane style wings, made it really, really a balance of lightweight and, well, like kind of lightweight, but more on the heavy side, but aerodynamic enough where it kind of just was fast, to put it bluntly. The maneuverability was also quite excellent, and the fact that it has 2 machine guns. And in 1917, that was a pretty good, that was pretty good, especially since the British and the French were still using 1 machine gun on their aircraft. The British would eventually put a Lewis gun on the top with 1 mounted on the bottom, but either way, having 2 machine guns forward facing and where you can see where both of them are hitting is quite the advantage. And the Albatross would go on to be known as one of the better aircraft of the war. By the end of the war, 1,866 would be built. I don't think there are a lot of survivors out there, and it's kind of one of those forgotten aircraft too, because everyone knows the Fokker D.R.1, the triplane, the Fokker D7, but no one really knows of the Albatross, even though it was really the aircraft that kind of won the war for them, especially since Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron, I think he got almost 40 some of his kills in an Albatross, whether it was a D3 or D5A. And his brother here, Lothar, also got quite a few kills in the Albatross. Now, I'll go over the Red Baron, Manfred, his older brother, whenever I cover the Red Baron, Fokker DR1. But Lothar here is a very interesting character. So Lothar is, of course, the younger brother of Manfred, the Red Baron. And where Manfred was more calm and collected, Lothar was kind of a hothead. He didn't really share his brother's sympathy, for lack of a better term. He, where Manfred would show mercy, more mercy than Lothar, at least. You never shoot down a defenseless man. You shoot for the aircraft, not the man. If he starts going down, you don't follow him. You just let him survive under his own devices, etc., etc. Lothar would basically chase down a aircraft, his engine smoking, waiting for his aircraft to start on fire so that he could be guaranteed that kill. And it kind of got on the bad side of his brother Lothar, and Lothar actually almost wanted him out of the squadron. And even though Lothar is actually the better pilot than Manfred, he didn't have Manfred's hunting skills, which is why Manfred von Richthofen is the high-scoring ace of all time. He just was an excellent hunter with excellent vision. Lothar didn't have that. He was a hothead who just so happened to have a pretty good talent with flying aircraft. He would eventually end the war with 40 victories, exactly half of his brother, still behind Werner Voss, which, if I really hope one day I can get a Werner Voss minifig, because Werner Voss is a very interesting character, and I want to talk about him so bad. Probably whenever I make my Fouts, I'll make it a Werner Voss Fouts. So he would end the war with 40, and he would survive the war. And after the war, he would go into the airmail service. He would fly planes to deliver mail from place to place. And in 1922, I believe January of 1922, his plane would actually have an engine failure, and he would die in a airmail plane crash in 1922. So it's kind of interesting how this man would fly from 2.5 years in the German air service, being shot at by multiple people. Who knows how many times he's almost died flying in the war, just to die in a non-combat environment delivering mail. But Lothar eventually, like his time in the war, he eventually would chill out and relax and become an actual leader of in the squadron. And in this guise with the aircraft, he has a red stripe around the fuselage. This is because at the time when Manfred was running Jasta 11 or Squadron 11, he was in charge of what would be known as the Flying Circus, and every member of the Flying Circus at least had a small piece of red. Lothar had his red right there, and he eventually would have a red aircraft, almost red, all red aircraft with a yellow tail. Maybe at some point I'll make one of those too. We'll see where we go from there. But with that said, that is the history of the Albatross D3 and a little bit of history on Lothar von Richthofen. If you learned something, go ahead and put it in the comments. If you want to see if you want me to review a kit that I have or something like that, throw a suggestion in the comments as well. If you like the video, hit a like, subscribe if you want to see more, because there's a whole lot more for me to do, and recommend it to a friend who you think is interested in not only Legos, but in Lego planes and tanks and all that, but who's actually interested in the history of it and where these aircraft and tanks come from. So with that said, I've been Folkerman, and let's continue to build history.